Unit 11 All India and Central Services. A unique feature of Indian Administrative Service is the creation of certain services common to both the centre and the states, namely the All India Services. These are composed of officers who are in the exclusive employment of neither centre nor the states and may at any time be at the disposal of either. The officers of these services are recruited on an all India basis with common qualifications and uniform scales of pay. And notwithstanding their division among the states, each of them forms a single service with a common status and a common standard of rights and remuneration. Like other federal politics, the centre and the constituent states under the Indian Constitution have their separate public services to administer their respective affairs. Thus, there are central or union services to administer union subjects like defence, income tax, customs, posts and telegraphs, railways, etc. The officers of these services are exclusively in the employment of the union government. Similarly, the states have their own separate and independent services. Historical development. Ever since the creation of Indian Civil Service in the days of the East India Company, there has always existed in India an All India cadre of service. The All India cadres were introduced almost in all departments of the central government. These services were, however, not under the control of the Governor General. They were directly under the Secretary of State for India and his council. No All India Service officer could be dismissed from his service by any other authority than the Secretary of State in Council. An officer had a right of appeal to that body if he was adversely dealt with in important disciplinary matters. His salary, pension, etc. were not subject to the vote of any Indian legislature. These elitist services, unresponsive and unaccountable to public opinion, found it difficult to adjust themselves to the reform era, introducing every limited responsible government under the Government of India Act of 1919. The Lee Commission in 1924 recommended the abolition of certain All India services, particularly those dealing with departments that had been transferred to Indian hands under the Act of 1919, namely the Indian Educational Service, Indian Agricultural Service, Indian Veterinary Service and the Roads and Building branch of the Indian Service of Engineers. It, however, recommended the retention of Indian Civil Service, Indian Police Service, Indian Forest Service, Indian Medical Service and the irrigation branch of the Indian Service of Engineers. It also recommended the increasing Indianization of these services. The Commission further recommended that any British officer should be free to retire on a proportionate pension if at any time the department in which they were employed should be transferred to the control of responsible Indian ministers. These recommendations were implemented in practice. Further changes were made in the position of these services by the Government of India Act of 1935. Indians had always been demanding the abolition of All India services. It was argued before the Joint Select Committee of the British Parliament considering the draft of the Act of 1935 and emphasized by the British India delegation in their joint memorandum. It stated that further recruitment by the Secretary of State of officers serving under the provincial governments, which were to be handed over to popular control, was undesirable, and that services in future be recruited and controlled by the authorities in India. The Joint Committee, however, only partly accepted such demands and recommended the continuance of ICS, IP and IMS civil. This recommendation was embodied in Section 224 of the Act of 1935. Thus, at the time of transfer of powers in 1947, recruitment was open only to two All India services, namely the ICS and IP. The recruitment to the IMS had been suspended. The most important and highest ranking of all such services was the Indian Civil Service, commonly known as ICS, which, owing to its very high remuneration and enormous authority and prestige, constituted the steel frame of the British government of India. When the British were leaving India, there were 10 All India services and 22 central services. While guaranteeing the rights of the old services, the new Indian government had foreseen the need for replacing them with services controlled and managed by Indians. In fact, as early as October 1946, Sardar Patel, the then Home Member in the Governor General's Executive Council, had secured the agreement of the provincial governments to the formation of the two new All India services, namely Indian Administrative Services (IAS) and the Indian Police Service, which were to replace the old ICS and IP. Constitution of All India Services. The Constitution also provides for the All India cadre of civil services. It adopts especially the IAS and IPS cadres, which had already been created earlier. Article 312(2). It empowers the Union Parliament to create more of such All India services whenever it is deemed necessary or expedient in the national interest, provided the Council of States, the upper house, passes a resolution to the effect supported by not less than 2/3 of the members present and voting. Article 312(1). Since the Council of States is composed of the representatives of different states, its support will ensure the consent of the states to the creation of new services. The Constitution also authorizes the Parliament to regulate by law and recruitment and the conditions of services of persons appointed to these services. Accordingly, the All India Service Act was passed by the Parliament in October 1951. Since the inauguration of the Constitution, only one, namely the Indian Forest Service, has been set up. In 1951, All India Services Act was passed. By virtue of powers conferred by subsection 1 of section 3 of the Act, the central government framed new sets of rules and regulations pertaining to the All India services. It became necessary because the old rules at certain places had become redundant. The rules that were in force before commencement of the Act were also allowed to continue. Thus, there come into existence two sets of rules regulating the conditions of All India services. The old rules made by the Secretary of State or the Governor General in Council, which regulated the conditions of service of ICS and IP officers, and the new rules made under the 1951 Act were applicable to the officers of the Indian Administrative and Police Services. Indian Administrative Service. The Indian Administrative Service (IS) is the direct descendant of the old Indian Civil Service. As an All India service, it is under the ultimate control of the Union government, but is divided into state cadres, each under the immediate control of a state government. The salary and the pension of these officers are met by the states, but the disciplinary control and imposition of penalties rest with the central government, which is guided in this respect by the advice of the Union Public Service Commission. On appointment, the officers are posted to different state cadres. The strength of each state cadre, however, is so fixed as to include a reserve of officers who can be deputed for service under the Union government for one or more tenures of 3, 4 or 5 years before they return to the state, for one or more tenures of return to the state cadre. This means that the Union government has at its disposal the services of officers with first-hand knowledge and experience of conditions in the states, while the state governments have the advantage of their officers being familiar with the policies and programs of the Union government. Such an arrangement works for the mutual benefit of both governments. The majority of individual officers have an opportunity of serving at least one spell of duty under the Union government. Many have more than one such spell. The practice of rotating senior officers in and out of the secretariat position is known as official parallels as the tenure system. Another distinctive tenure of this service is its multi-purpose character. It is composed of generalist administrators who are expected from time to time to hold posts involving a wide variety of duties and functions. For example, maintenance of law and order, collection of revenue, regulation of trade, commerce and industry, welfare activities, development and extension work, etc. In brief, the IS is intended to serve all the purposes formerly served by the ICS except providing officers for the judiciary. Thus, this service is a kind of generalist service and its officers are liable for posting in almost any branch of the administration. Indian Police Service. The Indian Police Service is an original All India service. It had pre-independence origins, which differs from its compare. The IS in two words. Number one, most of the officers in this service work only in the state since there are only a few police posts at the center. And number two, its pay scale and status are lower than those of the IAS. The officers of the IPS are recruited from the same unified All India Civil Service examination, which recruits all members of the IAS, IFS and other central civil services. Recruits to the IPS are first given a 5-month foundation training and later handling training at the Sardar Patel National Police Academy, Hyderabad. The subjects of study and the training in drill, handling of weapons, etc., which have a direct bearing on the normal work of a police officer. The syllabus of training includes studies of crime psychology, scientific aids in detection of crime, methods of combating corruption and emergency relief. After completing a year of training, the probationer passes an examination conducted by the UPSC. He is then appointed as an assistant superintendent of police. But before the appointment, he has to undergo a year's program of training. He is given practical training which requires him to do the work of various subordinate officers. It is only after this that he is appointed an assistant superintendent of police. As an all India service, it is under the ultimate control of the union government but is divided into state cadres, each under the immediate control of a state government. The Indian Police Service is managed by the Ministry of Home Affairs, though the general policies relating to its personnel are determined by the Department of Personnel and Administrative Reforms. Indian Forest Service, IFS. The Indian Forest Service is the only all India service that has been set up after independence. It became operational by an Act of Parliament in 1963. Its pay scale and status is lower than that of the two original All India services, the IS and the IPS. Its recruits are chosen from an exclusive examination conducted by Union Public Service Examination Commission, which consists of a written test and interview. Though it is an All India service, its nature is not that of a generalized civil service, but is specialized and functional. It is managed by Department of Personnel and Administrative Reforms, which is in charge of making rules of recruitment, discipline and conditions of service regarding All India service. After selection, the appointees undergo a foundation course lasting 3 months, along with successful candidates of the other All India and Central services. After the foundation course, the probationers move to their own academy, Indian Forest Institute at Dehradun, for a rigorous 2-year training course, the end of which they have to pass an examination before formal posting. The Indian Forest Service is cadre-based, as in the case of other All India services. Like all other All India services, a member of this service can come to the centre or deputation, but has to go back to his cadre after the period of deputation is over. Immediately after being posted in any office within the cadre, he is kept on probation for 1 year, whereafter he gets his regular posting at a different office in the same cadre. The outer perimeter of the operational area is a state or union territory. Importance of Indian Administrative Service. We will now discuss the distinct role of the Indian Administrative Service. The Indian arrangement, creating a common pool of officers who are in the exclusive employ of neither the center nor the states and fill the top posts in both union and state administrations, comes nearest to the ideal of joint action, cooperation and coordination between the two levels of government as envisaged in a federal polity. On the one hand, a single integrated federal service common to both the center and the states would be a negation of state autonomy. On the other hand, if the federal government is denied its own services, one of the two results may follow. Either the state services will be reduced to the status of being mere agents of the central government, or the central government may find itself helpless in case of non-cooperative attitude on the part of the state services. The Indian experiment avoids both by providing separate and independent union and state services and yet facilitates coordination and cooperation, and if necessary joint action between the two levels of government by creating a common cadre of officers at the top level. It also avoids the possibility of the best brains preferring federal services to state services, leaving the latter to be managed by the second or the third best. As it is, the All India services being recruited by the union government on an All India basis attracts the best persons who are then posted to different states. Such services cadres thus are means for carrying a wider stock of talent to states. No better way of strengthening the state services can possibly be suggested. Again, constant transfers of such officers from the states to the center and back makes them aware of and conversant with the administrative problems at both levels of the government. Such officers therefore can be the best agent for carrying out administrative coordination between the federal and the state administration. Recruitment of All India Services. We shall now describe briefly the method of recruitment in the All India Services in India. As mentioned earlier, the recruitment is made by the central government on the basis of competitive examination annually conducted by Union Public Service Commission. The examination is a combined one for a number of services like IEFS, IAS, IPS and the Central Services Class 1 and 2. To appear at the examination, a candidate must be between the age of 21 and 30. Only a university grade, one holding BA or BSc or an equivalent degree can appear at the examination. The examination combines a written test of a high standard with a personality test by the Union Public Service Commission in the form of a personal interview. The former aims at judging the level of intelligence and academic learning, and the latter attempts to make a measure of the qualities of personality and character. The examination system is modelled on the British general type rather than the American specialized type. This is a provision for relaxation of age up to maximum of 5 years for SC and ST candidates and 3 years for candidates belonging to OBC category. The number of permissible attempts to appear in examination has been restricted to 4, with a relaxation for OBC candidates and SC and STs no limit. Prior to 1979, a single competitive examination used to be held. There were 3 compulsory papers: essay, general knowledge and general English, each carrying 150 marks, but of a number of optional papers, 3 papers of 200 marks each and 2 additional subjects for IS and IFS only. Out of another list of subjects each carrying 200 marks were to be offered. The candidates who qualified in the written examinations were called for interview, which carried 300 marks. The candidates who failed to secure a minimum of 33% of qualifying marks in the interview were declared unsuccessful, and it was abolished in 1958. The interview marks were added to the marks obtained in the written papers. After this, the Commission recommended the list of selected candidates in order of merit to the government. The above system of recruitment in All India services was criticized from a number of point of view. The UPSC decided to review the system thoroughly. For this purpose, a committee on recruitment and selection methods under the chairmanship of Professor D.S. Kothari was appointed by UPSC in 1974. The committee submitted its report in 1976 and made the following recommendations. Number 1. To hold a preliminary examination to screen the candidates for the main examination. Second, to hold the main examination to select candidate for entry to the LBS, National Academy, for a foundation course of about 9 months. Third, to hold a post-training test of 400 marks to be conducted by the UPSC on completion of the foundation course, the purpose being to assess personal qualities and attributes relevant to the civil services. Fourth, to assign candidates to a particular service on the basis of the total marks obtained in the main examination and the post-training test at LBS Academy, taking into account the candidates' preferences for the services. Fifth, to allow the candidates to answer all papers except the language paper in any language listed in the English 8th schedule of the Constitution or in English. The Kothari Committee's recommendations regarding the examination scheme, preliminary and mains, was accepted by the government and it was implemented by UPSC in 1979. Satish Chandra Committee. The UPSC set up another committee in 1988 under the chairmanship of the former UGC chairman Satish Chandra to review and evaluate the system of selection to the higher civil services and to make suggestions for further improvement. The committee submitted its report in 1993 and the government is gradually implementing some of the recommendations with effect from the civil service examination of 1993. The main recommendations as accepted by the government are: Number 1. The practice of holding a common examination should continue. Second, an essay paper should be introduced from 1993 examination and the candidates should be allowed to answer this paper in any one of the languages included in the 8th schedule or in English. Third, the marks for the personality test should be raised from 250 marks to 300. Fourth, from the list of optional subjects, certain languages like French, German, Arabic, Pali should be excluded. Fifth, for both preliminary and main examinations, medical science should be included as an optional subject. Sixth, allotment of services should be on the basis of candidates' rank and preferences. Seventh, LBS Academy of Administration should be developed into a high-level professional institution. Eighth, adequate infrastructural facilities and proper facility support should be provided to the training institutions. Ninth, the UGC may review the scheme of conducting coaching classes for students belonging to the minority communities to enable them to compete in various competitive examinations. Present pattern of civil services examination. The competitive examination comprises 3 successive stages. A. Civil services preliminary examination. B. Civil services mains examination. And C. Interview. A. The preliminary examination consists of 2 papers of objective types, multiple choice question, and carry a maximum of 450 marks. On general studies having 150 marks and another paper of 300 marks on one subject to be selected from a list of optional subject. The question papers as a screening test only. The marks obtained in this examination by the candidates who are declared qualified for admission to the main examination are not counted for determining their final order of merit. The number of candidates to be admitted to the main examination is 12 to 13 times the total number of vacancies in the year. The main examination consists of a written examination and an interview test. The written examination consists of 9 papers of conventional essay type. The 9 papers are following. These interview exercises. Training of All India Service personnel. Recruits Recruits to the All India and Central Services are given a 5 months foundational course and then special training in the training institutions for their respective services. The idea underlying the foundational course is that officers of the higher services should acquire an understanding of the constitutional, economic, and social framework within which they have to function, as these largely determine the policies and programs towards the framing and execution of which they will have to make their contribution. They should further acquaint themselves with the machinery of government and the broad principles of public administration. The foundation course is also intended to cover such matters as aims and obligations of the civil service and the ethics of the profession. Foundation course also develops among recruits to different services a feeling of belongingness to common public service and a broad common outlook. After completing this 5 months foundation course, the probationers of the services other than IS leave for their respective training institutions for institutional training. But the IS probationers stay at the academy to undergo a further course of institutional training. From 1969, the government has introduced a new pattern of training called the Sandwich Course. For the Indian Administrative Service, the new entrance to IAS undergoes 2 spells of training at the academy with an interval of about a year, which is utilized for foundational course. After completion of the foundational course and spell of institutional training at the academy, the probationer, as he is called, is sent to the state to which he has been allotted for practical training. At the end of this training, he again comes to the academy for a second spell of training, where emphasis is placed on the discussion of administrative problems the probationer has either encountered or observed in the course of practical training in the state. This part of the training is thus more problem oriented. At the end of the second spell of training at the academy, the IS probationer has to sit for a UPSC examination before being given the charge of a subdivision in a district. Cadre management. Management of public services in India was until 1970 shared between the Ministry of Home Affairs and the Ministry of Finance. The responsibility of the former pertained to general conditions of service other than those having a financial bearing, while the latter was ultimately responsible for laying down conditions of service involving financial implications. The function of Ministry of Finance is to consider the financial implications of these matters and that of the Home Ministry to take into account their effects on the efficient functioning of the services in general. The Ministry of Home Affairs was the central personnel agency in the Government of India. Its responsibility ran both vertically and horizontally. It administered and controlled the All India services. It regulated all matters of general applicability to the services in order to maintain a common standard of recruitment, discipline and conditions of service as well. Besides, it looked after the following matters. Number 1. Implementation of reservations for scheduled castes and scheduled tribes in various services. Second, re-employment of displaced or retrenched employees and also persons who joined the army during the national emergency. Third, setting up of vitally machinery for joint consultation and compulsory arbitration of unresolved differences between the government and its employees. After 1970, the Department of Personnel and Administrative Reforms under the Home Ministry has become the managing authority in the case of the two All India services, namely IAS and IFS. The Indian Police Service, which is also an All India service, is managed by the Ministry of Home Affairs. Need for All India services. Commenting on the need for the setting up of All India services in a speech before the Constituent Assembly, B.R. Ambedkar, the chairman of the Constitution Drafting Committee, said, "It is recognized that in every country there are certain posts in its administrative setup which might be called strategic from the point of view of maintaining the standard of administration. There can be no doubt that the standard of administration depends upon the caliber of the civil servants who are appointed to these posts. The Constitution provides that there shall be all India services, the members of which alone could be appointed to these strategic posts throughout the Union. Ambedkar thus emphasized the contribution such a service could make in bringing about greater efficiency in the administration of the Union as well as the states. Secondly, there are others who emphasized the cohesive aspect of such services which it is claimed will ensure the uniformity of the administrative system throughout the country. We in India are fortunate enough to be able to carry out, if we will, that experiment in large measure, thus providing an effective check to falciparous tendencies and secure for its recruits attractions which no other services can have. In the fifth place, since the responsibility for the administration of a state in the event of the breakdown of the normal constitutional machinery is vested in President, the existence in the state of a certain number of officers of all India services occupy key posts in the administration will certainly be helpful to him. He can count more on the cooperation of officers who in the last analysis are union government's employees than on the officers of the state government proper. Central services. Unlike the All India services, the central civil services are under the exclusive control of the central government. Its member positions only in central government. The civil services of the central government comprise established services known as central civil services as well as civil posts created outside the established services, which constitute the general central service. Both the established central service and the civil posts are classified in the descending order of importance into class 1, class 2, class 3 and class 4. It has been often pointed out that since the appointing authority is the same, there is no justification for classifying the services into the All India and Central services. Though the appointing authority is the same, yet there is a significant difference between the two. Officers of All India services are employed to serve under the central as well as the state government. Further, the members of IAS can be appointed to any office calling for duties of a general supervisory nature, while the officers of the central services are employed in jobs of specialized nature. Therefore, the distinction can be said to be justified. Recruitment to the central services class 1 and 2 are made by the Union Public Service Commission on the basis of unified All India Civil Service Examination. Training and cadre management. Recruits to the central services class 1 have to attend a 5-month foundational course at the Lal Bahadur Shastri National Academy of Administration, Mussoorie, and other central training institute before they go to the training institution of their respective services. As the central services are unifunctional and specialized in nature, the syllabus of training differs from that of the All India services is as much as courses of study have a direct bearing on the work which a member of the particular civil service has to perform. A recruit to the central service is also given practical training or training on the job during his training period. At the end of his training, the probationer passes a departmental examination in subjects directly related to his work before he or she is sent for her or his first posting. The basic pattern of training is the same for all recruits to the central services. The day-to-day administration of these services rests with the individual ministry under which the posts exist. Also involved in the management of these services are the Department of Personnel, which determines the conditions of service, and Ministry of Finance, which is concerned with the pay scales and other financial aspects of conditions of service like fixation of pay, grant of increment, pension and gratuity, contribution to provident fund, etc. The Indian Foreign Service. The Indian Foreign Service IFS comes under Central Civil Service Class 1 and was created after independence. It is under the exclusive control of the central government and its members are recruited from the top few positions of All India Civil Services examination. Among the central civil services, it is the topmost in prestige, status, pay and emoluments, and its recruits are asked to serve in Indian mission and embassies abroad. It is managed by the Ministry of External Affairs. Also involved in the management of the IFS are the Department of Personnel, which determines the conditions of the service, and Ministry of Finance, which is concerned with the pay scales and other financial aspects of conditions of service. In matters of allowances, the numbers of the Indian foreign services are more fortunate compared to other services. They are entitled to foreign allowances which are fixed with reference to a. Local cost of living, b. Other expenditures which an officer serving abroad necessarily incurs either at home or abroad, over and above that an officer of corresponding grade serving in India. C. Representational expenditure, that is expenditure which, while optional for a private individual, is obligatory for a member of the service resident by virtue of his official pension. The recruit of the IFS undergoes a training program which covers a period of 3 years. He is attached to a district for some time to enable him to pick up contact with practical work. He also undergoes a period of secretariat training. Training program for IFS, however, puts emphasis upon the study of language, Hindi or a foreign language, and of subjects, the knowledge of which is considered essential to a member of the IFS.